Now within the SSC video, we talked about its general aesthetics and its general direction of the whole biological modification side, but we also talked about SSC's origins within EVA suit manufacturing, and in particular the specific modifications added to it. If you need an EVA suit for heading outside of a ship, or just going outside of your station or moon base, well, SSC has one branded for you, and specifically customized to fit your exact needs, whether you need multiple arms or hovering jets to help you maneuver around, SSC has you. And then throwing back in the general, weeb factor. And SSC needing its own constellar security forces since it has multiple worlds, it's no wonder that we eventually got a ninja mech, with a bit of a paracausal eldritch light twist. Hi, hello, and welcome back to LANCER, where today we're talking about the good old nightmare mech. Or at least in its descriptions, the Dusk Wing. It's definitely the ninja mech first when you just look at the art and the general appearance. And the fact it's got a bunch of holograms and deception and all about acting as invisible, high maneuverability, small, delicate, and just a personal exo-suit really. But then you go into the fact that this is one of the main paracausal things SSC has, and the entire origin of said paracausal tech. This is where the nightmare part comes in. Outside of what it can do and how you can flavor the Dusk Wing, it's the nightmare of its origins, where it got its tech. It doesn't have general product placements like Horus Armory to an extent. All of its descriptions within its abilities and systems are just nightmarish. The after action report.
Died the teacher, died the monster. As we killed it, Died taught us what to fear and how to face it.
Ah, the DHIYED expedition. But we're at the 10th mech in our lineup, heading down to SSC for our third time, and we're getting there. We're getting halfway. A reminder again that we go through the list going down the manufacturers and then alphabetically down each respective list. And in the video we cover the LLs, or license levels. At license level 2 of a license, you get the actual chassis. Everything else you get the components. And a reminder that you can mix and match any of these from any of these previous videos, the equipment that is, not the chassis. So all this crazy eldritch light stuff that we're about to talk about can also go on to complement the stuff the Goblin or the Gorgon can do. But yes, that eldritch light stuff, that actual meat of the Dusk Wing, or at least its description and lore. So in modern times with SSC, this is a heavily used frame within the constellar security forces. Primarily for the things where you need selective agents or esoteric defenses, stuff that enemies aren't going to quite know how to go up against. The secretive ninja specialist acting in obfuscation. But where they got this tech from, especially not being Horus or some of the initial front row seats that Horus Armory inherited from GMS. In the early SecCom roots, no. When it comes to SSC, it's the DHIYED expedition. Or primarily for the Dusk Wing, it's the DHIYED expedition, which is what all the general lore bits and descriptions go into. That after action report of heading into this meta vault where reality just didn't mean anything. Belief itself was a weapon. What's real, what's not. This goes into the holograms, illusion, and crazy light patterns that the Dusk Wing is a specialist in. Now, onto the stats as compared to the Everest, the starting frame. To begin with, all these reds, this just makes sense. It's like the Goblin. It's a half-size chassis. It's just around you. It's basically power armor or an exo-suit. It's less a mech. And again, robotic ninja power armor. But again, the way you survive is the high evasion and other minor bonuses to defenses over along the side. And that high speed. Like in the last video, we just talked about how this is tied for the fastest mech chassis out the gate. And alongside a trait later on, this thing can move around. But you got your reference, you got your picture, you've seen the arrows, we're moving on. So as previously stated, it's size 1/2, so probably not going to be carrying much. But for its weapon mounts, we have an Ox mount and a Flex mount. So the dual auxiliary mount, we haven't had a chassis with this yet, but essentially you can't, it's not like a Flex mount where it's a main weapon or an Ox. This one is just two auxiliary weapons together on the same mount. It's really here to mess around with all its different systems and abilities on the battlefield and zip around. Dusk Wing isn't really here to be a walking gunboat. But now onto the traits, with maneuverability jets being the first. This allows you to hover when you move. Now we haven't really touched on flight, but to give a perspective on hover versus flight. If a chassis has flight or an ability that gives them flight, they have to move in a straight line. It's essentially like a booster in one direction, or wings helping you move, or gliding on. The Dusk Wing's origins as a heavily modified EVA suit, this thing can zoom around. Tons of, maneuverability jets, allowing it to hover around. Only while it's moving though, so it's not consistently floating in the air, it's still standing on the ground, but when it moves, it can just move wherever. Doesn't need to be in a straight line, it can go up or down or hover in place for a little bit. But really useful in just, again, maneuverability, especially if you're in 0G. Next trait is the Harlequin Cloak. So this is what all the little, leafy, flowery bits, or the, cloak. This allows the Dusk Wing to become invisible during its turn. Well, not even allow it, it just is invisible during its turn. Now on the surface, that might be seen as debatable on how useful that is, namely in the fact that you're still visible when the enemy's going or shooting. But the big thing is that while you're invisible during that turn, you can hide. which means you can move past threat, past Overwatch, they can't hit you. And even if you're not hiding during that and still just moving past people or Overwatch or threat, it still has the invisibility trait's 50-50 coin flip on whether the attack's gonna go or not. So really good to move out of a situation, or if you're in cover, to move while invisible and then into another set of cover. And again, with this, you can cover a lot of the map. You have 6 speed, and or a size half mech, you have a lot of hiding spots. And lastly, for its traits, like the Goblin, it's fragile, so an additional difficulty dice whenever you're making hull checks or saves. It's just harder to do any big bulky things with. You're a tiny chassis. While visually and design-wise it's not as bad as the Goblin where you were just seeing the pilot sitting there, you're still just within a thin casing of metal and armor. Still really good, can still take massive hits, but again, you're fragile. At least compared to the regular chassis. But done with the traits, we move on to the core power, Dyed Articulation. Now the opening to this and the general lore blurb tied to it, this is the after action report, or the beginning of said after action report, from that infamous Meta Vault expedition. But we can leave that to the side for now. We don't need to really delve too deep into that, especially since it's just someone talking, or a quote. But for its active, we have Hall of Mirrors. So after activating this protocol, every time you start a unique movement, so, moving, boosting, or anything added by talents, you leave a holographic imprint behind. And this ability and these imprints last for the whole scene. And this time, unlike the Goblin, it is a true hologram. It doesn't count as an obstruction, it's immune to all damage. But unlike the Goblin, you cannot disable this with systems. It's staying there. Speaking of an enemy, if they start their turn in it, move through it, or move adjacent to it, it explodes, forcing an agility save against 1d6 damage. So you fail, 1d6, if you pass, half that damage. 1d6 energy damage. Now that's already really good because you don't have a limited number of these, they can't be destroyed with systems, and they're just mines laid around the battlefield, or setting up a booby trap because this can be done in a scene which isn't just combat. But you also have a new quick action ability with Hologram Teleport. So after activating this quick action, you teleport to one of your holograms within range 50. Range 50! That is such a long distance, and why I brought up specifically that scenes aren't just combat, you can use this outside of it to ricochet back to a point, or recall yourself. And after teleporting, every hologram explodes. A burst 1 agility save with the same damage as previous, so the 1d6. And after doing this, you can't make new holograms until the start of your next turn, so even if you boost or keep moving after, you can't make new ones. Then again, until the next turn, they keep going. This one's a long-lasting core power. Just this chain of frozen previous events and moments following you. And again, teleporting through range 50. But now we're heading into LL1 with the Veil Rifle, a main rifle. A line 10 weapon, 1d3 plus 1 energy damage. This isn't really shooting just like a bolt of lightning or a laser, this is shooting the strange light from Dyed. Just firing out this repeating fragmented pattern that warps space in front of it. Specifically warping space because it actually ignores allies. Well, not just ignores allies, it alters them to buff them. It protects them, instead of the light damaging them like it does the enemies it passes through. When it hits an allied character, it doesn't actually cut through the chassis or damage them in any way. It instead leaves this mass of shimmering lights around them. And these shimmering lights provide soft cover until the end of their next turn. So it's not even just a weapon, really. This has a half bit of utility. You don't have to worry about accidentally getting allies in a line. You can just purposely try to get them in the line. On top of all of this, because it's a beam of eldritch light that passes through things, it has accurate. So you have the extra d6 when you're rolling attacks with it. Next up is Neurospike with 2 system points, giving a new tech invade action, which also plays around with that mysterious eldritch light, giving you 2 different options, first off starting with Strike Code. The more offensive of the 2, but also still defensive. So after you apply this to an enemy, they take 2 heat whenever they attack until the end of their next turn. As similar tech to the Veil Rifle and the other things and projections from Dyed just assault the internal systems of the chassis. Simple but effective. Next one is Mirage. So first you invade the enemy target, then after Mirage has been successful, you pick either yourself or an ally. Now that previous target under Mirage, whenever they go to attack whoever you chose, sees this massive coruscating light, not able to quite pin down where they are, granting whoever the target is invisibility against that one person attacking. So it's not really adding the invisible condition to you or the ally directly. It's applying it in reference to the attacks of the one enemy you targeted with Mirage. And this lasts until the end of the enemy's next turn. And with LL2, we have a second weapon on a really small chassis. This one being the Burst Launcher, another main weapon, with a range of 15 and 1d3 explosive damage and 1 heat damage. So I would describe the Burst Launcher as more a flash burn grenade than a flashbang grenade. Flash burn in particular tied to the heat, but also mixing in the disorientation of everything. And the actual explosive damage. This is blowing up. But again, playing into that, making enemies disoriented. When you score a critical hit with the Burst Launcher, the enemy becomes impaired until the end of their next turn, as they got hit with both the concussive force and the burning, searing light, representing the critical hit probably in some vital camera or sensor system. Big fiery burst. Then, to represent the fact it's a grenade launcher, it's shooting over, it has arcing. And then also accurate, so just like the Veil Rifle, you still add the additional dice, again the Spec Ops of SSC, the fine equipment. Next is the Flicker Field Projector for 1 system point. Whenever you boost or make a standard move, you leave this massive dazzling after images behind you. This consistent trail that's also like a mirror image on top of you, just these massive forms on where they could have possibly been and were. And what this does mechanically is that the next time you're attacked, you count as invisible, as they don't quite know who the target is or what to pin down. But once they hit or attack for the first time, they know and can pin you down. You can only benefit from 1 instance of this effect at a time, so if you move like twice during a turn, it's not stacking those attacks. Now for the capstones around LL3, we have Stun Crown. 2 system points, so as a quick action, you can activate Stun Crown, leaving this Burst 3 flash of light above you. All hostile characters within the burst and in line of sight of you must make an agility save and a system save, as all of their systems and the chassis itself are overwhelmed by what's going on. If they fail the agility save, they're jammed, as the mass of light just interacts with all their systems in a strange way. And if they fail the system save, they're impaired, as again, their systems are just wailed upon by this massive information and sensor data. Both of these effects last until the end of the enemy's next turn. Also, even if you're in the burst, but if you're behind cover, you're not affected. And you're limited too. You can't just spam Stun Crown over and over and over again. But a big area jam for tech attacks and impaired for everything else. And Burst 3, especially with the fact that you can maneuver so much with Hover and Speed 6, you can get to a very precise location where it's most effective. And lastly is Oasis Wall at 3 system points. Oasis Wall itself can be activated as a protocol. Until the start of your next turn after activating Oasis Wall, you can only move in straight lines. You create a holographic trail behind you. Trail barrier is same size as the Mech, or a minimum of 1, because you're size half. It's not entirely useless on, well, the Dusk Wing or Goblin. But if you do put this on a larger chassis, it goes up from size 1 to size 2 or 3. These holograms are left in the spaces behind that you pass through, and people can move through them. They're not like a physical barrier that stops you, they're not an obstacle. However, they do still count as hard cover for adjacent characters and give them resistance to energy damage, as lasers, electricity, and just energy attacks can't quite go through the barriers. Also because of the fact it's a strange hologram that eats energy. It's immune to all damage. Stuff just passing through it. The holographic trail doesn't count as an obstruction, it's immune to all damage. Characters can pass through it, but they can't end their turn in it. So also, if they'd be pushed into it, they'd stop just before. Unless they'd be pushed through it with enough movement, then they'd pass through it. But they can't stop in the space. The barrier lasts until the end of the scene or until used again and deals 2 heat to self, which with only a 4 heat cap at base, that 2 heat actually adds up quick. You're already in the danger zone from using it once. But just running through the battlefield, leaving this trail of after images behind you, acting as a physical barrier. But with this, and also a lot of the other holographic stuff and the illusionary images and just the coruscating light, you could really flavor Dusk Wing's abilities and equipment in many different ways. You can also throw these onto other chassis to have them fit a bit more, like a bunch of different glitch effects or editing reality when it comes to the Goblin, or more that strange, dazzling, mimetic light if you put it on the Gorgon, more of the hard light and shield stuff that the Saladin plays into. The Dusk Wing has some fantastic equipment and systems. Fantastic in the sense of if you really want to play that strange eldritch light, holograms, deception hiding around. But to the Dusk Wing itself, it really plays into that. The deception, the hiding. If you give a pilot with the proper stealth talents on this, this is terrifying and a proper ninja. A ninja in an exo-suit that's armed with paracausal fractal light. That's terrifying. Especially if you're bumping into the esoteric defenses of SSC, an organized group of these things. Going invisible when they're moving around or maneuvering, or again, in between barriers, you could just never see them. And when you do eventually see them or catch them, it's this strange dazzling light or these strange figures and holograms or fractal patterns trailing behind them. Things that infect your systems, causing jammed and paired, just entire chaos within the battlefield. As it's not just deception or hiding, it's also disorientation. It's throwing people off. That horrific light show teaching moment, belief being used as a weapon. That's what the Dusk Wing is. It's belief as a weapon. Trusting in your senses to your detriment. Because you're marching along, this Dusk Wing's been harassing you this entire time. You've been trying to take a specific gene sample from an SSC planet. And after this entire time, this entire march, you've lost one of your own members. A Sherman in your group finally blasts the thing away. Standing still for the briefest moment where you could finally get a shot off, and it's just a bit of steam left in the air. Nothing left of the chassis. But that's what it wants you to think. You don't think you killed it. Not with this consistent harassment over days, with the fine skill of this pilot taking out one of your own members. It wants you to believe you killed it. And you can't begin to think of what it's done while you think yourself safe. Thank you for watching the video of our Trippy Nightmare Ninja Mech. It's a big jumble of words there as a descriptor, but it fits. It honestly fits. Because you could really play into the trippy, crazy light patterns. The ninja is quite obvious, especially for the Spec Ops role it's used for, and rough image. But especially the nightmare, that's in its descriptors, that's in the DHIYED expedition. The strange questions you're left with, belief as a weapon. And belief as a weapon plays so well into just, you know, the idea of being stealthy, deception, a ninja, a spy of some sort, but then also as the paracausal. The fact that literal belief is being used against you. What you think is real being real or not. But no, the descriptors for everything within Dusk Wing are fantastic. And the Dusk Wing itself, if you want to play that deception illusionist role, you can flavor it many different ways. But I'll leave that one to you in the mix and matching of all the different hologram components. But thank you for watching again, a thank you to my patrons, and have a nice day.